Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much indeed, Paul. Such a pleasure to be here discussing such important subjects, and this idea of a sustainable and resilient future being at the heart of the business here for the next few days. And of course, the world has been now on this journey towards sustainability for more than 30 years at the global level through agreements made at the Rio Earth Summit amongst other international gatherings. And some really big issues have been placed on the table, and some of them were in the headlines over recent weeks in Brazil with the COP30 summit in Belém, looking at how we might as a global community drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions and create conditions for more effective adaptation to climate change, which is now baked in. And then on top of those conversations, which come around every year, we have the regular meetings of the Biodiversity Convention. It gets fewer pieces in the media, but the parallel emergency of declining biodiversity and the damage being caused to ecosystems is also receiving huge international attention. And alongside these two huge megatrends in the environmental space is, of course, the challenge posed by different kinds of noxious pollution being released into the environment. And in this country, of course, we've had a very strong emphasis over the last few years on the quality of our rivers. So these things are more or less understood, they are more or less debated politically, and yet there is a huge issue which hardly gets any profile at all, which is the declining health of soils globally. This is, I think, possibly the biggest environmental issue that almost nobody talks about, is the fate of this vanishingly thin layer that lies between the Earth's vast geology and the huge expanse of its atmosphere, is this almost miraculous phenomenon of soil function that's going on between the two. And we can increasingly see how the decline in the health of soils is really a major material issue in relation to those mega trends. And I've been struck, as I've gone along over many years of environmental advocacy, at the very fundamental and deep linkages between soil health and the state of the Earth's climate system. Not least because there is an awful lot of carbon held in soils, but of course not necessarily permanently held in soils as it is entering the atmosphere, driving the process of global heating. I reviewed a paper a couple of years ago that estimated that the emissions of soil carbon into the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution is about equivalent to 4 years of current emissions. If you think of all the oil, coal, gas, methane escapes and everything else, that is an absolutely huge quantity of greenhouse gas that's coming from land degradation effectively. And you get a lot of emphasis, and we saw more of it over the last few days in terms of the role of tree planting in being able to absorb and hold carbon from the atmosphere. Much less emphasis do we see on the role of soils, including the opportunities we have for maintaining and increasing soil organic matter as one means of being able to reduce the overall quantity of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Very interesting to note, and the Director of Science at Natural England pointed this out to me yesterday, is that of all the tree planting that's going on in the country right now, and much of it is very positive and very good, not knocking that as an environmental strategy, but all of the carbon being absorbed by all of those trees is less than the carbon that's being emitted from the degradation of peatlands across the country. And that really puts it into perspective. And if you look at the global fact of about 3% of the land being covered with peat soils, holding more carbon than all the forests put together, then you begin to realise the scale of the oversight in terms of where we may wish to put our effort in being able to combat climate change through sustainable soil management. And then, of course, on top of the carbon dimension, when it comes to climate, is the adaptation side, and how we're going to be able to cope with what are now increasingly dramatic events occurring as a result of the heating that's already happened. Seen in the devastating flood events going on, there's some huge problems with flooding being caused in Southeast Asia right now, across Sumatra and right across the Indian Ocean to Sri Lanka, and in other parts of the world, severe drought. And the extent to which we can ameliorate some of the effects of this through soil management is still, I think, quite poorly understood. And in this country over recent times, we've had food production hit by 1 year of extreme wet, followed by a year of extreme drought, and very little discussion devoted to the thing that sits in the middle of extreme drought and extreme wet, which is soil health, and the extent to which we can ameliorate some of that by restoring properties to soils that have been degraded over years of unsustainable use. And so we see that these services provided by soils in holding water and reducing flooding, being able to ameliorate drought, the extent to which we can hold carbon from the atmosphere, these functions are still, I think it's fair to say, underappreciated. And so we need to do something about that. And then, of course, the linkages between soil health and nature are absolutely huge. And one of the things that we know is the biggest driver of nature loss globally is our food system. And one dimension of that is the conversion of more and more natural habitats in order to be able to produce food through row crops and through ranching and livestock agriculture. And I've seen with my own eyes over the years some examples of how unsustainable soil use really drives that process of nature decline, and including in the savannas of central Brazil some years ago, where I was traveling looking for a particular species of very rare parrot. And we searched high and low through landscapes that were still in some part intact. But huge areas of those savanna woodlands had been cleared to make way for agriculture. And within 5 to 10 years, the heavy tropical rains had destroyed the topsoil. And so what do the agricultural industries do then? They look for more soil. They call it land. Actually, what they're after is soil. And so they clear more forest, which also becomes degraded, thereby making the question of how to manage those tropical soils for sustainable agriculture a key question in whether or not we can reduce deforestation. And again, soil management not really part of the equation, as the obsession is on food security, and food security translates into more soil being available, and as we degrade soils, then we need more fresh soil, and so the treadmill of industrial agriculture continues to render these terrible impacts because we haven't yet mastered the techniques needed to sustainably manage those systems indefinitely into the future. And if you look around at the declining health of soils globally, I mean, there are some staggering things going on. One thing that I do every now and again is have a look on Google Earth, big estuary systems around the world, and you can see that in the blue sea, great big plumes of brown belting out from major rivers into the ocean. And you all know what the brown is, of course. That's the land departing agricultural landscapes and going into the sea as a result of erosion. But on top of that, of course, soils are being compacted, reducing their function, and others are seeing a dramatic decline in the organic matter, which is contributing to the carbon problem and also causing issues with water retention. And so all of these things, in the end, these big issues linked with nature and with climate, they all circle back in quite fundamental ways to the state of soils. And indeed, so does the question of river pollution. And there's been an awful lot of effort put into seeking ways of reforming the water companies. Can we deliver bigger fines for pollution incidents? Can we create a new regulatory framework to encourage these companies to go in the right direction? Very often missing from this discussion is the fact of at least half of the pollution, in some catchments much more than half of the pollution, coming from unsustainable soil management in terms of the application of fertilizers, which are being applied because we've damaged the natural functioning of the soil, whereby now we need to add inputs in order to maintain the productivity of systems which have massively depleted in terms of their organic matter and their biodiversity in the soil structure itself. And so we're on a treadmill there as well in terms of how we are now having to deploy vast quantities of mineral fertilizers, which are coming with a huge carbon footprint of their own, thereby also exacerbating the climate challenge, again linked to a decline of soil health. And if you look then also at the aspects of agriculture where we're generating far too much waste as a result of intensive livestock farming, we're having to put the waste somewhere, and that very often is also adding to soil damage and to river pollution. And the example of the River Wye has to be a cause célèbre in this country as we see the effects of intensive chicken rearing leading to vast quantities of manure being created, and one of the ways in which we dispose of that waste is to put it on the land. In some people's estimation, it's a fertiliser. If you look at the state of the River Wye, you would say it is a pollutant. But in all cases, sitting between these big environmental challenges and the outcomes that we seek to foster in terms of more sustainable destinations is the question of soil management. So this is multifaceted, it is huge, and it is absolutely vital that we find ways of moving forward with more rational approaches. And there are happily some good policies coming forward that should and hopefully will help us as we look into the coming period. A land use framework for England hopefully will enable us to take more rational approaches to how we make choices around seemingly competing demands for housing, for biodiversity, for carbon, for food production, for infrastructure. Where are we going to put all of that? And where are the best places to put it? Well, very often we need to understand land from the point of view of the services being provided by the soils, and the more we can understand that, the more we can make sense of a new land use framework. And when it comes to the nature side, we have the local nature recovery strategies now coming through, and that will give us a further template, hopefully, to be undertaking more rational spatial planning. So the work you will do here over the coming couple of days, and indeed all of the work that brought you here, this incredible body of wisdom, of insight and knowledge, is absolutely vital in navigating the pathway to a sustainable future. And not only just in relation to soils, but also in relation to climate, into halting and reversing nature decline, and of course this critical emerging priority of global food security at a time of rapid global heating. All of these things, they all blend together and they all land in the ground beneath our feet. And understanding this and being able to share that knowledge in order to be able to shape policy and practice is a vital national and indeed global need. I'll just finish with one further observation, however, which I think is important, because if you think about the big environmental challenges and the extent to which the public more or less understands the need to reduce emissions, they understand more or less the benefits and the moral responsibility we have in stopping the extinction of the great whales and rare birds and everything else, people still, I think, don't really get soil. And the perhaps most direct connection they have with it is their food. And most people, I think, in this country today and in many other countries, their food doesn't come from soils and the recycling miracles that are being performed by this array of billions of microorganisms that are enabling plant growth and sustainable food production. For them, food comes out of a plastic bag or a freezer cabinet, and I think it's going to be very important that we begin to shift this cultural barrier as we go forward. So translating this incredible body of knowledge that you've built into things that will connect more with the public. And I was just reminded in one conversation as we were having coffee this morning about the way most people regard soil. The cultural label they have is dirt. For this miraculous, incredible subsystem of planet Earth's life support system, we need to shift that to get people to understand that soil isn't dirt, it's life, and it is the very fundamental underpinnings of society and civilization. And if we can do that, it will add even more value to the incredible work that you are all doing. I wish you a very successful few days of sharing knowledge and thinking about strategies for the future. This work is essential, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing the impact of it over the years ahead. Thank you very much indeed.